someone who was a urologist recently, I think from NYU, and they were telling me that things like the microplastics, and I'm not particularly aware of what a microplastic is, to be honest, but things like microplastics in our environment are some of the chemicals that are causing sperm quality to reduce.
Mm-hmm.
Is there evidence to support that?
There's a lot of different chemicals to be sort of concerned about or think about. I think, microplastics are one, phthalates.
What is the phthalate?
A phthalate it's a chemical that's in a lot of different like creams and lotions that we use. And so those also have been shown to affect androgen, and kind of endocrine function inside the body. Bisphenol A is a common chemical that's used in the manufacture of plastic, and that's also been found to have these endocrine disrupting properties. So that's also been correlated with semen quality.
Endocrine disrupting?
Endocrine disrupting.
What does that mean?
So, if you look at sort of pathways for men and women, there's, hormones, right? I'm making testosterone, and that acts on my body as I was a child to help make me a man. Now it kind of helps, keep me a man, with grow a beard, all those sorts of things, giving me my deeper voice. And so there's some of these chemicals that kind of mimic some of that action or block some of that action. And so if that happens, it can affect, normal development of, boys or girls, maybe, again, affect sort of semen quality. If we think about sort of the origins of changes in semen quality, some of it may be when we're adults, but some of it also could be during development, either when we're developing inside of our mothers or, during puberty, if something kind of affects the normal timing of that. It could be, again, could have pretty devastating effects. And so one theory for that is some of these chemicals that affect these sort of biologic pathways, these endocrine pathways involved in that.
From the research you've seen on sort of these chemicals, is there any changes that you've made in your own life at all? Anything that it's kind of made you think differently about the choices you make in your own life with your kids? Because you've got 3 kids, so you have an opportunity to kind of influence them at an earlier stage than most of us can influence ourselves. But
yeah, so one thing that we do is I've thrown away all plastic water bottles. I'd say I still use it because I find them very convenient, and I'm done with reproduction. But certainly for the kids, I make sure they don't drink out of plastic water bottles. So we have either glass or metal. I do think there is data that's a very large exposure that kids get, and I think it's fairly easy now to remove that.
What does the data say about plastic bottles?
If you look at, exposures from that, they just leach a tremendous amount, with water, it kind of sits there all day. So I think it's a very, again, most plastic water bottles, I want the, plastic bottle industry to come after us, but that's a common way for, individuals to get exposed to it. So I think if we're seeing that's one of the main touch points for plastics, is usually through our kind of food and water supply, then yeah, I think it's easy to get rid of it if you can.
Is there anything else? I've read recently that heat has a role in our sort of sperm quality. So if we're going into saunas or something, or if we're spending a lot of time, sunbathing, then there's science that suggests that will lower our sperm count.
Yeah, so that is right. So, I think that, again, you can kind of look at this sort of in a bigger sort of global warming kind of context. And people have, theorized that maybe that could also play a role because, the testicles are outside the body because they need to be a few degrees cooler for sperm production to occur. So anything that warms them up can definitely be a problem. So when I talk to patients in clinic, for example, we do talk about sauna use, hot tub use. Some men bathe every day, like in a bath. And those all can impact sperm production. There have been studies to show that men that use saunas on a regular basis, they have lower sperm counts, and then when you withdraw that exposure, sperm counts will go back to normal. One sort of interesting application of this was to try and use this data or use that knowledge to come up with a contraceptive. So there was this weird sort of like truss kind of belt that actually pushed the testicles up into the groin. Which actually turned out did reduce sperm counts to 0, I think. And again, the few men that volunteered to do that. But you can imagine, I think most men are not going to be too excited about that because it's probably pretty uncomfortable. The other way that I've seen it is I've had patients that have gotten sick, certainly around COVID. That happened not infrequently. Men would come in, telling me that, they just got over a COVID infection where they had high fevers for, a few weeks. And then their sperm counts would be very low. And then, we wait a few months. It takes about 2 to 3 months to make a sperm. So we let one of those cycles or 2 of those cycles go through and their sperm counts came back. I had a patient even before COVID, it was like 41-year-old guy. He had normal sperm count. And then all of a sudden he measured and his sperm count had gone to 0. And it turns out he had a flu with fevers about 102 degrees Fahrenheit the week before. And again, we let kind of sort of nature take its course. He recovered and then his sperm counts came back to baseline. So we do see that as well.
With that belt that you mentioned that it holds the sort of testicles closer to the body, I'm guessing it's doing that to heat them up, basically, which reduces the sperm count. Obviously, then one would think about their boxer shorts. We're all wearing very tight boxer shorts these days. That's like in vogue or whatever. So is there any studies to suggest that boxer shorts can reduce sperm count if they're tight?
So that's like that's one of the most common questions I get, like boxers versus briefs. And that's been studied a lot because that is a very common exposure. I think I usually just tell men whatever's comfortable. I think it's unlikely that any single layer is going to make a big difference, unless, again, you have the specially designed underwear that pushes testicles up into the groin. But otherwise, as long as they're outside the body, it should be okay.
What about mobile phones and technology? Is there any link between fertility and our use of technology, specifically having these devices in our pockets close to our genitals?
That's another common question that I get. And that is certainly something that's changed right now versus 20, 30 years ago. So there were some studies that initially showed kind of this signal that men that use cell phones more had lower sperm count. But some of these studies were, they're older, and you also worry about some of these kind of confounding things. It may be that people that use phones more do other things more. They may have more stress in their life and other things that could affect semen quality. So there was a clever study that was done where they actually took ejaculate, so took sperm, put it in a cup, and put a cell phone next to it, and tried to measure changes in the quality of the sperm. And they actually did find some. They found higher rates of like DNA damage within the sperm that was exposed to the phone versus not. Kind of trying to control for temperature, which we said is important for the health of the sperm.
Wait, so they controlled for temperature?
They controlled for temperature, and just having kind of the cell phone, getting its signal. Seemed to affect, the DNA damage in sperm. It wasn't, it was a statistically significant, difference. It maybe would not be kind of a point where we would get as worried clinically, but it is a change. So I think it's something to think about. I think that, aside from that, cell phones, I think nowadays don't get too hot, so we're not as worried about heat, but whether this RF, this radio frequency exposure may impact things is maybe a theoretical risk. But again, there's not a lot of concrete data. So I think that, again, if a lot of my patients do tell me that they try and keep their cell phone in their back pocket or front pocket to try and avoid that. I think that's fine.
I've been having this conversation with my partner a lot. She really believes that my cell phone should never be slid under my genitals, which I sometimes do when I'm like, I don't know, when I'm in the car or something, or when I'm on the sofa, I don't know, when I've got my hands full, I'll just grab it and I'll kind of like slide it between my legs.
Yeah.
And she'll reach in and pull it out and say, and I think because she's concerned about those 4 kids that we want to have.
And I think she cares about you too.
Yeah. To be fair, she's not someone that's going to read PubMed and read about the studies, but it's just a feeling she has.
Yeah.
And I always refuted it and thought, there's no way. There's no way, because they would have tested it. And the test seems so easy. You get sperm, you put it in a little thing, you put the phone on top of it, send it some text messages, connect it to the Wi-Fi, the Bluetooth, and see how the sperm get on.
Yeah.
I didn't realize there was a study associated with it.
Yeah. I think laptops also can do that too, but they also have a little more heat associated with it. So a similar study was done in laptops where they had sperm, put it next to a laptop, and they controlled for temperature and saw the same pattern. Again, sort of the Wi-Fi signal can also affect, again, sperm, DNA damage and sperm quality. But also, laptops can get warm too, right? Some of the batteries, some of the moving parts within can heat up too. And it also just serves as almost like an insulation if you put it over your lap. So I do talk to patients about that as well, to maybe use like a pillow or something else just to try and shield yourself a little bit.